Welcome to Satellite TV. I'm delighted to say I'm rejoined once again today by our special US correspondent Leyla Gulen once again to continue our periodic discussions where we look at some of the latest hot topics affecting the Sikh community. Leyla, welcome back, and perhaps you'd like to elaborate on what we're going to cover today.
Well, thank you so much, Angus. It's always a delight to join you. Wanted to start here. The Khalistan movement is growing in momentum, both in India and in the diaspora. We talk about it at length on our channel in both podcasts and our regular shows, but to summarize a lot of speculation and in simple and practical terms, how can Khalistan be delivered, Angus?
Yeah, good question. We do, of course, talk about Khalistan a lot, and a lot of the discussions I have with particularly a lot of our podcast guests focus on, well, it's all very well having this concept, this historic concept of Khalistan, but how actually are we going to deliver it? And we always have to look at the practical steps. Okay, what is it going to take to deliver it? It's all very well getting out there with our flags and our protests and our campaigns, but how actually can we deliver it? Well, of course, the first simple answer is, well, we need a referendum. We just follow normal democratic protocols and we hold a referendum in the Punjab. Let the people of the Punjab decide. That is a normal process of any democratic nation. But of course, then we come up against the very simple problem is that India will not accept it. India has actually made it a criminal offence to even discuss or debate or demand or protest or demand secessionism, to demand your own country. And of course, this is what the Khalistan movement have come up against. So the simple question is, will India hold a referendum in the Punjab? No, they won't. They will not allow it, which again flies in the face of any democratic norm, which of course is extraordinarily frustrating. And of course, any argument about secessionism, any activism for breaking away, it's not even breaking away, it's just the basic right for self-determination, is always met by brutal suppression. And this has happened ever since 1947, and arguably before that, of course, under the British Empire, but certainly since India obtained its so-called independence. Any part of India that has then stood up and said, look, actually, we want to be independent too. We want our own right to self-determination. We fought for it against the British. Now we would like it for our own area, our own geographical state. And of course, the Punjab isn't the only one that's gone through this. There have been all sorts of different secessionist movements across India. And we often talk about India being made up of this fractured, fragmented group of artificially brought together cultural identities. We talk about J&K, Jammu and Kashmir. Of course, Jammu and Kashmir is primarily a Muslim state. It is the majority Muslim state are culturally and ideologically in a completely different ballpark to the rest of Hindu-dominated India. So it's unsurprising that J&K would actually like to make its own decisions under its own cultural banner and its own cultural policies. But of course, J&K has been flooded with 500,000 Indian troops. That's what India, the Brahmanical control of India, that's how they treat any demand for independence. J&K has suffered 500,000 troops who have literally gone in there. The leaders of the local political leaders were literally placed under house arrest under 2019. The Indian Constitution, written in 1950, actually gave J&K reserved status. There were special clauses giving Jammu and Kashmir their own right to some level of autonomy. And yet in 2019, come the BJP government and Narendra Modi, he literally ripped up that part of the constitution, rubber stamped by the Supreme Court, and said, yes, of course, we're ignoring that now. We're taking full control. They placed the democratically elected leaders under house arrest. All the human rights were removed, internet was blocked, all communication channels closed down, and that was it. They took brute force control of J&K. That's how India treats any secessionist movement. We've had in the past, we still actually have the Naxalist movement. I'm just going to run through a few other movements as examples. We have the Naxals. This again is another, it's more of an ideologically driven demand for independence. And it's called the Red Corridor. It includes states, and it originated actually in the east, in West Bengal. but it's spread across almost that central belt of India. It includes areas like Chhattisgarh, Bihar, Jharkhand, Maharashtra, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh. These other states, and it's ideologically driven by the Maoists. It's actually, it originates from the communists, and it's driven by the Communist Party of India, the Maoists. But that is another one that, again, has likewise been very brutally stamped down upon India. And I mentioned Telangana amongst one of those states. Well, historically, post-1947, Telangana state, and Hyderabad, as it was in those days, post-1947, it was the largest princely state of India, of what became India. But it was this princely state. It was run by the Maharajas. And they were offered post-1947 as part of that negotiation. All those princely states were given the option: would you like to become independent, or would you like to form part of this overall new India as it became in 1947? And Hyderabad said, the princely state of Hyderabad said, no, we would like to go independent. What did the Brahmins do, the Brahmanical controllers of India? They said, no, we're not letting you have that. And likewise, they went in with brute force. Basically, they essentially used brute force blackmail, and they made those the princely state of Hyderabad step down and say, hands up, okay, we have no choice, we will become part of India. And likewise, even today, we still have the independence movements in those northeastern states of Manipur, of Assam, of Meghalaya, Tripura, Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland. All these states, likewise, they have their own independence movements. Now, they're only small because they're being brutalized into a minority status. Like in Punjab, like in JK, is that India have sent in the brute force troops, the might of this huge Indian machine to make sure that all these independence movements can never gather enough momentum to then either combine as a combined independence movement and say, look, we need to break up India so we can all run our own areas. India's made sure that these fragmented states have remained small and powerless. The problem they've got now is the Khalistan movement is growing massively, Leyla.
Interesting. Well, if India is so ideologically opposed to offering a referendum, what options remain available at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. So the question is, we've looked internally within India. India is not going to allow it to happen internally, which means, therefore, by default, it's got to come from outside. And this is really where the diaspora plays a huge role. The diaspora has been massively active in campaigning for this whole Khalistan movement. And even that in itself is indicative of what's going on in India. Is so many people in the Sikh community had to flee India, literally for their lives, after the oppression of the 80s, the 90s, and of course the economic oppression, all these other more subtle attempts at oppressing and burying the culture and identity and the success of the Sikh community. So they've had to flee India to build new lives abroad, whether it's the US, Canada, Europe, all around the world. We've now got this massively powerful diaspora. And even, I'm going back to, for example, the farmers' protest. Again, they were funded, they were helped, they were driven by outside help from the diaspora because internally they couldn't, because the oppressive state of India made sure that no power base could be built within India. So it's had to come from the community outside. And this is what is going to drive the Khalistan movement, and this is what is driving it, and this is what's going to make it happen. So it's this external pressure. Now, the diaspora have to be clever about this, and they are being clever. They're being shrewd about this. They're going about it the right way. It means they need to get international governments to campaign and lobby on their behalves to pressure India to make it happen. Now, of course, we're looking primarily at the international heavyweights. I'm looking at the USA, the European Union, for example. So what the diaspora and the Khalistan movement needs to do is persuade the heavyweight nations like the US, like the EU, and like basically the Five Eyes nations. They've got to get them into alignment. They've got to say, look, you need to support this Khalistan movement because it is in your benefit. Because all these nations, the government's going to say, well, what's in it for us? It's a natural human reaction. What's in it for us? What do we benefit from it? Now, if the diaspora and the Khalistan movement can persuade the US government, and I think that is the key there, if the Trump administration can be persuaded, it is in your interest, that will be backed by the US government, and that in turn will pressure the Indian government. The US government, as we talked about before, is already pressuring India to align with the West, democratically speaking. Well, align with the West on the Khalistan issue. And I think this is what the diaspora are doing very cleverly. They are lobbying the international governments, whether it's the US, the UK government to some degree, but as the UK government have expressed very little interest in supporting anything to do with the Sikh community, but certainly North America, Europe, even Australia and New Zealand Zealand, Prime Minister recently came out massively in support of freedom of speech of the whole Khalistan movement. So there is the will there. So ultimately, yes, they need to aim to try and persuade these governments to align, and that they need to be quite clever how they go about that. Now, one other tactic just to throw into here as well is what's in it for India. Ultimately, India don't want this to happen. They don't want India to break up. For all the reasons that we've talked about in many cases. But ultimately, what is in it for the Brahmins, the Brahmin controllers of India? They are campaigning. They are moving all the chess pieces around to create their Hindu Rashtra, this Hindu master race, this land, Hindustan, let's call it. Basically, it's already, India is an 83%, I think, majority Hindu population. They want India to be 100% Hindu. They want their Hindu Rashtra, as it's called. Well, okay. The argument then from the diaspora and the international community is you can have your Hindu Rashtra. You can have it. All the Hindus can live in one geographical area. You can call it whatever you want, Hindustan, whatever, but you can have it. But in return for that, you've also got to grant all these other areas their own independence, or at least their right to ask for it. They don't have to accept it, or they don't necessarily have to have it, but at least give them the democratic plebiscite to ask for it. And that is one tactic, I think, that is not being exploited enough. Now, of course, then the other question then is the United Nations. It's all very well getting the United States, the European Union, etc. on side. And I haven't actually talked about China and Russia. What's in it for China and Russia? It would be interesting if Russia and China actually said, yes, you can have Khalistan. That's a whole area we could talk maybe another half an hour about, but I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But ultimately, it really always comes back down to the United Nations. Now, the United Nations, it's a funny old concept. It's a great premise. In theory, it works on so many levels, but it doesn't work on many other levels. It's a bit of a toothless tiger, as we've seen in so many international situations. Ultimately, though, it does form a final legal arbiter. It does form a body where at least these debates can be had, agreements can be reached, and it does provide some form of credibility, some form of legal standing for other nations then, like the heavyweights, to push these things. Iraq war, prime example. The US and its allies pushed the Iraq war under so-called UN mandates. Now, the UN mandate on its own, again, is a pretty toothless tiger. But when it's backed up by the brute force of the United States, for example, it then carries legal weight. Khalistan can be the same. If it gets UN backing, the US can then impose it upon India, saying it's endorsed, it's rubber stamped legally by the UN, you've got to make it happen. So we need the UN on side. Now, again, the Khalistan movement being very clever about this, they have already approached the UN. They have now coalesced into single legal entities to represent Khalistan. They need to do this because you can't have 20 different organisations approaching the UN saying, we represent the Sikh people. It carries no single weight. It needs one single entity. And this is what, for example, the Sikh Federation International is doing. It stemmed originally from the Sikh Federation UK, but they set up entities all around the world that is going to provide one single legal entity that can then approach the United Nations, and in turn the United Nations has then got one body to talk to negotiate, to talk, and to look at the legal case for Khalistan. The legal case for Khalistan is now moving apace because it does have legal basis. India is defending its position by saying there is no legal case or no legal right to hold a referendum because it is a threat to our geographical boundary. It is a threat to our actual constitutional boundary as a nation. Now, there is one defence against that, or one legal attack against that, and that is where the people within that particular area that's calling for independence have not been accorded equal human rights. And this is the legal basis of the case against India, is that it is very easy to prove in a court of law that the people of Punjab have not been offered equal human rights as other parts of India, particularly, let's say, the Central Belt. And therefore, the legal case of India, who are defending themselves against the referendum, falls apart. And this is the legal case they're taking forward to the UN, and I believe will win. We also have, amongst this, we have the referendum, the unofficial referendum, but we have the Sikhs for Justice referendum being held across the diaspora. That result, although not legally binding, I believe will carry an awful lot of weight in any court of law, particularly when it comes to the United Nations. Also, other things that need to be put into place. The Khalistan movement can't just win a referendum and then suddenly get granted, okay, you've got Khalistan, what are you going to do with it? And they're going to all stand around and say, oh, now what? Well, of course, they need to have a government in waiting. They need to have their ducks in a row, as we call it. So they do need to have the governmental infrastructure in place, ready to just to flick a switch and it's there, it's happening. There are movements behind the scenes to make sure that once Khalistan is established, that a governmental infrastructure and overall governing structure can be very quickly installed, essentially to manage the place, because it's going to need managing immediately from day one, from minute one. Because India, no doubt, will want to wash their hands very quickly of it. But it also needs, for example, financial support. It's going to need support. It's going to need to set up a central bank. It's all these financial instruments it's going to need to put in place. Currency, what currency it's going to use. So again, likewise, it's going to need to have all its ducks in a row in this area as well. And then, of course, looking forward into the near and middle future, of course, it's got loads and loads of natural resources. It's got its water supply, the 5 rivers. It's got its huge agricultural industry. These industries and these natural resources need managing. They, of course, need exploiting, but they need exploiting quickly because, of course, coming back to the financial support, it needs to become financially independent as quickly as possible. So, Leyla, as I say, there's an awful lot to put into place. There's an awful lot to put into place. But I'm happy to say these things are happening behind the scenes, and this is why I believe Khalistan is an inevitability.
Well, it sounds like an incredible strategy, but this is going to be my last question for you, Angus. If this could happen, what is your predicted timescale for this?
Yeah, this is a big question, because how soon could this happen? I often say, and I refer to the Soviet Union as a prime example of this, it could happen quicker than we realise. Now, if you sat down and plotted it out, you're probably looking at a generation to put something of this magnitude in place. And indeed, my original predictions, I'd say a couple of years ago, and I talked to Tony Mangat, for example, the person behind Satellite, and I said, look, this is going to take a generation to put into place. And he just looked at me and said, no, it's not. It's going to take 5 years. And I just sort of laughed because, no, but in reality, yeah, absolutely. Because it's a huge concept to put into place. But you look around the world and you look at, you look at similar situations. These incidents, these world-shaking events often happen, and I would say probably in most cases, happen unpredictably and very quickly. It takes a small catalytic event, something almost unforeseeable. The Soviet Union, the fall of the Berlin Wall, all happened literally overnight. They happened so quickly, it was unpredictable. What was also unpredictable was how they happened. They were triggered by ridiculous events, things that you couldn't have predicted. And that's what happened to then unfold huge events. And that is what I think will happen with Khalistan. I think all the pieces are moving into place. All the ducks are falling into a row, as we say. As I say, there's an awful lot going on behind the scenes, politically, strategically, structurally, legally, all these certain boring, dry areas, they're all being put into place behind the scenes quietly because it needs to be, because we believe, the whole Khalistan movement believe, and I think India believes behind the scenes, quietly, they'll never admit it, but they believe that it only takes one weird event to trigger something. Those dominoes will start falling. I suspect this literally could happen in the next 5 years, Leyla.
Wow, that's incredible. 5 years. 5 years goes by in a flash. Well, once again, Angus, you've given us so much to think about. Wonderful depth of knowledge that you have on this subject. So I really appreciate you taking the time to answer these questions.
It's always a pleasure, Leyla. It's always great to have our discussions, and I look forward to our next one. Well, on that note, let's bring things to a close. Thanks very much for joining us once again, Leyla, and thank you for joining us on Satellite TV. We will see you next time.